What's up, Scyushi Squad? We are back in some more Trove, and today we are going to be going through all of the patch notes related to the update you guys just got on PS4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. That's right, the Sunrise update, as well as two other major updates, or one other major update, let's say, is actually out on all platforms right now. So all of you guys that are watching this on console, you guys are completely caught up to PC, which... oh, it's about time, dude. I'm so excited and just happy that you guys finally end up getting to experience all of the wonderfulness that is these recent updates. Now, I want to be clear. I am going to end up having links in the description of this video to the original patch notes videos, because in those I end up going into more detail than we may end up doing today. Because if we end up going through the entirety of the patches, we're going to be here for hours, like legit, because the update that you guys ended up getting packaged into one big update on console is actually 3 different updates. Mario, and Luigi Mario movie reference. I love that movie. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, the sponsor of this video, the Solarion. Don't I look hot? That's because this class uses fire. It's a fire pun because fire is hot. Ooh. I know I'm not supposed to be black and white, and I'm also not supposed to be made out of just normal paper, okay? Unfortunately, you'll have to bear with it because that's all I have. I don't have a colored printer. Color is expensive, and I'm pretty sure I was supposed to make that on construction paper, and probably with a lot less staples digging into my head. Jokes aside, you guys, this is huge. You think that I'm joking, but you will be sitting there in excitement crafting your own stupid Trove heads in a moment, because we've actually got a special sponsor today, and that is Gameago. Yes, the creators of Trove, the publishers of Trove, the people that own Trove right now, they actually reached out to me about this particular contest, which is going to end up being a Trove cosplay contest. Now, you don't gotta go super crazy and make like a full-on costume, although I know some freaks are probably going to. Or you know, generally speaking, in order to participate, all you gotta do is construct this head. I hope that this thing doesn't break, because I want to participate in the contest just because it actually sounds fun. Generally speaking, what you're going to end up doing is, I'll put a link in the description to the website where you'll end up, it says watch their tutorial on how to end up building the head, which there's no tutorial at the moment that I'm recording this video, so I had to just do it myself. But don't worry, I have big brain, so I was able to do it. And then you download the do-it-yourself template, craft your Trove head costume in real life, and wear your costume in public, and record your adventures between July 29th and September 8th. And you're going to end up actually putting those up on TikTok with the hashtag Trove cosplay, hashtag cosplay, and hashtag gaming. Winners will end up being chosen September 16th. Now, what do you end up actually winning in this contest? Well, I'll tell you, wise guy, $1,000. 1,000 euros for both first and second place. I'm not even joking. This is actually insane. Like, they could have gotten away with giving away $100, but $1,000? Are you kidding me? Of course I'm going to compete in this competition, dude. So the way that this is going to end up working is first place is going to be strictly based off of the most likes on their TikTok video. Second place is going to end up being voted by a jury of Gameago employees and select influencers. I know that I am a part of that jury. I nominate myself. So along with this cash prize, winners will also have the option of joining the Trove developers on a Twitch live stream. So in order to participate, you do have to have your submission in no later than September 28th. So the funny thing is that even by participating, if you have one or more qualifying entries, you'll also end up receiving a Sundered Uplands cash in-game, which is pretty cool because that's actually a cash shop item. But as mentioned, I'll put a link in the description to where you can end up seeing the rules and everything else for yourself. And otherwise, yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. Thanks to Gameago for giving me the opportunity We are going to be hearing about this in pretty much every Trove video until the contest is over, you guys, because this is crazy, man. I can't believe that they have such huge cash amounts going out for something like this. And it genuinely sounds like a lot of fun too. Like, I already have like some ideas of how I'm going to end up going out in public and making an idiot out of myself. Also, don't worry, guys. I'm not going to end up like trying to use my influence to give me an advantage or anything. I'm just genuinely going to try and make like some funny video. Anyways, back to the patch notes. So the 3 updates that you guys are going to be getting is the Shadowhunter update, which is the Shadowy Spotlight, Royale Season 3, and of course the most recent Sunrise update. So we're going to end up going through these in order. So I'm going to be going first through the Shadowy Spotlight, but what we're going to most of all be doing for you guys today is to save on time. We're going to end up focusing on the parts that I deem the most important. Like, these are the parts that you do not want to miss, like talking about, oh, which classes ended up getting reworks and so on and so forth, because essentially in the Shadowy Spotlight update, we ended up getting the Shadowhunter some much needed attention, but it also ended up reworking a lot of the other classes, and you can see that in my videos in my 35k series or my 36k series, where I completely had to redo all of the 36k videos very, very fast versus you know, it was a very short time frame from the original videos to the new ones because of all of these reworks, which granted I'm slowly working on getting 45k PR so I can end up just doing those videos again. We still got the night left in the 36k video. Anyways, excuse the long intro. So the Shadowy Spotlight is going to end up being the Shadowhunter update. So Shadowhunter is going to end up being completely different. A lot of your abilities are going to end up being very, very different. We're not going to end up going into the damage numbers specifically. We're not going to end up hitting you guys with the percentages of how the attacks work or anything like that. I'm just going to try and be as to the point as possible. So the passive, Dark Whispers, nearby enemies periodically receive a shadow mark, increasing damage done to them, as well as making them visible through walls. When the Shadowhunter uses a basic attack on the shadow marked targets, a small explosion is triggered and it will end up dealing damage to the target and grant the class 1 Seeker. So Shadow Mark is quite literally going to end up working with your second ability, which is going to end up being the Seekers. Additionally, when dodging, the Shadowhunter gains a movement speed buff for a short time, so you can end up noticing that myself and any other Shadowhunter mains are constantly rolling now, because it's going to end up actually refreshing that movement speed, which the movement speed buff is actually going to end up being 40%. So that's pretty nice. Then there's going to end up being the basic attack. This is without the class gem. Keep this in mind. So basic attack damage has been increased overall. The projectile size has been increased, and additionally, basic attacks can shoot through walls and enemies. Again, this is without the class gem. Whereas with the class gem, the attack Shadow Blitz is going to have the basic attack become a rapid fire of arrows, which they've increased the damage of that, and additionally made it so that the ability will shoot through walls. It doesn't shoot through enemies though, which I find disappointing, because frankly speaking, that's one of the weaknesses of the Shadowhunter, is that it doesn't really have a way of dealing with large groups of enemies. Thankfully, our trap and our ultimate, yeah, but most of all, our trap is going to end up dealing significantly more damage, and so that's going to end up being kind of your end-all solution to dealing with large groups of enemies. So there's going to end up being the new primary attack, which is your right click, which I guess on console would be, is that left trigger? I think so, but it's going to end up being Shadow Seekers, which I constantly call them Shadow Seeker missiles because of Metroid just ingrained in my brain, right? But anyways, so the way that the Seekers work is it requires 1 Seeker in order to end up using this ability. So if I go over to these training dummies, I think I can get them to Shadow Mark with my trap. And then you can see these boxes kind of falling out on the ground, right? So lag is making it so that these don't end up going inside me, but there you go, they've actually gone into me. And that's quite literally how the code of the Seekers work, is those boxes get planted on the ground and they automatically get pulled into your character. And now suddenly we've got these 3 arrows on top of our character, which means we have 3 Seekers, which you can end up having a total of 5 of them. So on use, you'll launch Seekers that will hunt the closest target and explode on contact, dealing a pretty decent amount of damage. The Shadowhunter can store up to 5 Seekers at a time, and damage scales with the number of Seekers available when fired, which means that by having 5 of them, they're going to end up starting at their less least amount of damage, and then as more and more of the Seekers end up hitting enemies, they're going to deal more and more damage. Problem is that these Seekers are not designed very well, and so you're going to see, as I launch them out, you're going to see these little arrows on the ground, almost transparent, go towards their nearest target. So they are under the same AI, if you can call it AI, that the enemies are under. And as you may have noticed in the world, when you're fighting enemies, they're pretty stupid. And so your Seekers are pretty stupid. A lot of times they'll end up missing their mark. But on top of that, somebody over at the Trove dev team forgot to dial down the knockback on the Seekers. And so what often ends up happening is before your last Seeker ends up hitting the enemy, dealing the maximum amount of damage, they'll actually have all of the other ones knock the enemy away, because there's no cooldown between when each of the Seekers ends up hitting the target, and thus the knockback ends up all building up into one big force that can actually knock enemies off of dungeons. So I'd love to see that changed. I don't think it's going to happen. Sun Snare, so it throws a trap that detonates on proximity, deals a certain amount of damage and stuns nearby enemies, and now it has increased area of effect and applies Shadow Mark to enemies as well. The ultimate has been completely revamped, so you may have remembered that the normal one was you would toggle it on, and then you would end up doing a right click and it would end up shooting your big arrow that would end up getting caught on the terrain and so on and so forth. So now it instead fires a large damaging arrow of energy that deals a decent amount of damage for 7 seconds. So the first contact with an enemy will end up dealing a certain amount of damage, but then when the arrow, there's going to end up being 7 seconds of a damage over time effect afterwards initially. So when you end up, this arrow pierces targets and blocks, and as long as the ability button is held down, you will continuously fire arrows until you run out of energy. It will slow the player's movement down greatly while you're firing, and damage over time effect can be stacked multiple times on the same target. The ability has a 45-second cooldown, making it it's a very bad long cooldown. But anyways, ignore the training dummy damage that you guys are going to end up seeing, because these training dummies are broken. But essentially, if I hold down the button, you're going to see all these big arrows shoot out of me. They hit the target and causing damage, and then the damage over time effect is going to continuously hit the enemy as well, which, as you can see, is a pretty significant amount. Oh, wait a minute, that's broken training dummies. It generally is going to end up being a very, very powerful attack, and kind of changes the way that you build the Shadow Hunter, because this attack actually does scale off of attack speed, meaning that your best option for gear is going to be both movement speed and attack speed, because if you are going to end up using your Shadow Hunter for boss killing, you are going to need to have that attack speed for your ultimate ability, so that it can end up tagging an enemy with more arrows before you end up running out of energy. Then we've also got the tactical shot hidden effect, which is going to end up being the crystal ring effect, has actually been replaced by tactical seekers. So when enemies take damage from the Shadow Hunter's sacred arrow, which is your ultimate, a seeker missile will fire from the Shadow Hunter and attack the closest target. That single-handedly is the best hidden effect that you can get on the Shadow Hunter, because it essentially just adds extra damage on top of your ultimate ability. And as I mentioned, we are already like 10 minutes into this video. Granted, a lot of that was the intro, and we've only just scratched the surface and talked about the Shadow Hunter. So they kind of went into a little bit of detail here, talking about combat updates. Trove's combat is now in 64-bit rather than 32-bit, which doesn't really mean much other than it says it more elegantly than I could, saying that no longer will bosses be limited to a mere 2 billion health. So at 32-bit, the number could only go up to 2 billion, and now that they've basically changed it to 64-bit, it means that they can end up extending the numbers of boss health and resistance and so on and so forth, right? Opponents in the delves will no longer rely on somewhat random damage number reduction to suppress damage, although of course deeper in the delves it's going to end up being quite ridiculous just with the natural resistances, but it basically means that they can tighten it up and have it more uniformed rather than relying on randomness. Floating combat text now shows more digits, and there's also a space between each of the combat digit numbers, which is, it's a step in the right direction for you guys on console. Obviously on PC we have like very simple mods that have changed this since day one. Damage numbers aren't showing because this game is broken, but essentially I've got a mod that has like a little period show up between them. but at least on console you guys have a little bit of a space now. So there has been additional class updates, which again, I'm not going to end up going into the specifics of this, but I am going to kind of give you a summary of the big changes to these classes. So Boomeranger at the top has had pretty much everything across the board be buffed. If you want to end up seeing an actual gameplay option, there's my 36K video with the Boomeranger. Generally speaking, I think that Boomer is at a point where it's very, very powerful. Could have used a little bit more, but they've got the Bach Bow hidden ring effect. I think that's what it's called, right? Maybe, but it's going to end up being the best hidden ring effect on the Boomeranger that essentially makes your shots explosion shots, and that is going to end up dealing significant damage and going to end up completely changing the way that the Boomer works. You can definitely main the Boomeranger, okay? I just want to get that out there. Gunslinger has had some changes, most of all, for some reason, nerfs. I don't know why. Gunslinger already kind of sucked and needed a bit of a rework and in fact a bit of a buff, but for some reason they just brought it down even more. So Gunslinger is one of the only characters that I would say is probably one of the worst in the game right now, which is ironic because it actually used to be the strongest, and what they were doing slowly over time was reworking all of the characters around the Gunslinger so that they would end up being brought up to its level. And now the irony is that we've actually had not only all of these classes surpass the Gunslinger, but Gunslinger actually got, whoop, even a little bit lower, which I still don't understand. Fade Trickster ended up getting some pretty significant buffs. Generally speaking, you're going to end up being a lot stronger. You can definitely main Fade Trickster. You kind of always could, frankly speaking, but now more so than ever. It's just never been a class that I've been super interested in. Ice Sage ended up getting a buff. Why? I don't know. Some things ended up getting a nerf on the class, but it's very, very minuscule and slight. Otherwise, what they ended up aiming for with a lot of these reworks is you'll notice that a lot of the other abilities that were weak are now significantly stronger. So even with the Ice Sage, for example, they made it so that your Ice Crash is stronger, your Big Chill is a lot stronger, even though they ended up nerfing the base attack and the explosion effect from your Gem Pain Freeze, gem ability, which again, you can still main Ice Sage and you're still perfectly capable and actually more powerful now than ever because you can use your other abilities and it's actually worthwhile. Chloromancer ended up getting a pretty significant nerf, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not still an insane boss killer. You can still definitely main it without much problem. Candy Barb mains, you guys are going to be very, very excited because Candy Barb is actually a powerhouse now. However, the only problem that I have with the Candy Barb right now is that you still don't really want to end up using its class gem ability. It's actually better without it, just in terms of being able to spam that jump for movement speed. But obviously the number one with your class gem is going to end up being significantly better when you're fighting in a group because it's going to help to pull in all of the enemies and stuff. But I don't know. There's a couple little tweaks that I'd like to see them do with Candy Barb, not necessarily in terms of its damage, because its damage is actually doing great right now. Really, really fun class to main. I definitely want to end up swapping to Barb once I end up having a good set of physical gems, which I'm slowly working on with my Shadow Hunter. Neon Ninja got a buff. I don't know why, but hey, I'll take it. So Neon Ninja is just more capable than ever before. Neon Ninja was already super duper strong. If you ended up referring to my Trove for returning players, I kind of talked in that video a little bit more detail about how much the Neon Ninja had changed over like past iterations. But obviously you guys on console, you already know what the Neon Ninja was, how strong it already was, and how it's even stronger now. The Knight, this is a class that ended up getting a huge boost in its damage. Most of all, the funny thing is that the Knight is actually really, really powerful right now, but really, really boring. Because they made your base attack on the Knight better than the class gem ability. And so it's actually worse to have the class gem ability on the Knight now, because the Knight without its class gem ability gives it a nice dash ability for movement speed. And unfortunately, almost every other ability on the Knight will deal more damage than your class gem ability now. So Yeah, they ended up making the shield of the ult end up doing significantly more damage decrease. It's actually 25% instead of 10%, which makes a little bit more sense. Not that you're going to use the character defensively, but you can definitely main the knight. It's just really, really boring because all you're doing is holding left click. Vanguard got a slight buff, not as much as I would like. I think that Vanguard is kind of at the point right now where it's a bit lacking. Most of all, you're going to notice that the changes they did to Vanguard is that it got its ranged attacks buffed a little bit. Not by enough in my eyes. Dino Tamer ended up getting a buff. Did it need it? No. Dino Tamer is one of those sleeper hit classes that I feel a lot of people that main it know how awesome the Dino Tamer is, and then other people that don't main it are kind of like, really? The Dino Tamer? Even though it's actually one of the fastest and strongest magic classes in the game. Not the strongest or anything, but it's one of, if not the most efficient for speed farming at the very least. In terms of magic classes, we're not talking about physical. But anyways, Dino Tamer ended up getting a buff. Pirate Captain got very significant buffs. Pirate Captain was one of those characters that you could main, but it was very tricky because you had to use a lot of cooldown reduction in order to end up planting down as many turrets as possible, more specifically your ultimate, so that you can end up dealing heaps of damage. Now, the funny thing is that they ended up actually buffing the ult, so Pirate Captain's even stronger, but thankfully they buffed the other abilities of the Pirate Captain as well, so now it's a lot more viable. As mentioned, almost all of the abilities that were kind of useless ended up getting a significant buff. The knight a little too much on its base attack. Revenant ended up getting a buff to its base attack, which obviously is how you end up using the Revenant, and then it also just says that Spirit Storm overall damage has increased. They didn't give us numbers on that one at any point. Draco ended up getting a buff as well, which I don't understand because Draco is actually already a powerhouse, and generally speaking is just significantly stronger now, while the Tomb Raiser ended up getting a nerf. That one I really don't understand. I'm still scratching my head thinking about, because before this update, I'd say Tomb Raiser and Draco were kind of neck and neck in terms of how much survivability they had versus how much damage they ended up having. With Draco coming out a little bit on top, Tomb Raiser only surpassing it once it had all of its minions out and maxed out because of the purple health bar and so on and so forth. So it's very, very strange that Tomb Raiser ended up getting a slight nerf. However, there is currently a bug, let's just call it a bug because I don't think it's intentional in the game, where essentially when you end up summoning your baby minions, hello, can this thing work please? When you summon your baby minions, you essentially resummon them again to get a purple health bar on them. And what would normally happen is when you use your ultimate ability, it would eat up all of the purple health bars, and then you would have to recast your minions to get them to purple health again. Purple health just being that they do more damage. However, now they've actually got it at the point where it's a bug. Maybe it's intentional, who knows? They're not taking credit for it. But they've got it so that when you end up using your ultimate, it no longer consumes that purple health bar off of your minions. So instead, you can actually just have all your minions at purple health bar, summon your ult, you're doing optimal damage. Instead of summon your minions, get them to purple health bar, summon your ult, get your minions to purple health bar, then you're doing optimal damage, right? So it kind of cuts out the middleman a little bit, doesn't make up for the nerfs, unfortunately. Lunar Lancer ended up having some changes, very, very slight, just some knockback reduction on some of its attacks, who cares? The Bard has had an issue fixed with the Jubilant song, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the speed song. I don't know. Either way, it doesn't really matter. Not really any significant changes. So they added temporary styles, which is actually kind of nice, even though I'm not used to actually using it, where you will end up having temporary style section right here. So instead of taking up inventory space, a new type of collection called temporary styles has been introduced. These can be applied like any other style, but give no mastery and will stop being available after a certain amount of time. So I assume that this is going to end up being related to, yeah, leaderboard. Okay. Sorry, because I completely forgot that this was even in the game because I don't do anything on the leaderboard. So temporary styles are going to end up going away after normal reset time. They give you for PvP and Delve leaderboards, yada, yada, yada. Anybody who's at the leaderboards is going to end up enjoying them, but I don't really care. They changed it so that automatic Delve private portals will end up resetting. So they just after a while, if a player has a delve open for a long enough period of time and then fails to defeat the boss timer, a portal will open to a new, easier delve instead of just basically having you stuck and that's it. You can't do anything. So that's kind of nice. It does only happen in private delves though, so keep that in mind. And then there is some additional changes, but again, we're not going to end up going through those just because I've already covered all of these patch notes in more detail in the other videos that I'll link in the description. Now, that said, I am still going to end up having links to each of these different patches themselves if you want to end up reading through them rather than siphoning through some of my videos. But generally speaking, you know, you can get like direct feedback from me talking about like, oh, this feature is great, this feature sucks, or whatever. And with that, we were able to get through the Shadowy Spotlight update in a relatively good time. Honestly, I'm pretty impressed that we were able to get through that in 20 minutes because I thought it was just going to go on forever. But I guess it cut down a lot of time by not getting into specifics of all of the class changes, and it was definitely a lot better just giving you guys direct feedback, I think. Anyways, hopefully you guys appreciate us just getting to the point. So anyways, moving on to the Bomber Royale Season 3 is now live as well, and generally speaking, who cares? Seriously, I don't know why they put the man hours or the resources into even developing Bomber Royale Season 3 because nobody asked for it. And it barely sparked any interest in people going back to Bomber Royale because, let's face it, a boring game mode is a boring game mode. It doesn't matter if there's new content to it. I haven't even gotten any of the items out of Bomber Royale Season 3. However, the entire update is completely worthwhile, save for the fact that we've got this mount. That's it. This is going to end up being the Volatile Bounder, which is going to end up being tradable if anyone ends up getting it out of the chest, although good luck ever buying it on the player market. If there's one thing you're grinding Bomber for, it's this, okay? Because this bad boy is going to end up being quite difficult to get because I think it takes like 300 coins or something like that. Let me double check on our Bomber. Where is our Bomber token thing? Yeah, here we go. So it's going to end up, oh, 200. Okay. So it's 200 of the new blast coins, which does kind of suck because, of course, you can only have a total of 300 of them. But generally speaking, it's going to be very difficult to get this, okay? It is. Especially if you can barely find anybody playing Bomber. Your best bet is to go into a round and just respawn right away so that you get the 1 token per round when you can get a token per every 2-3 minutes or something, depending. Or if you're actually good at Bomber Royale or not completely bored and over with it like me, you could actually just play the rounds, and generally speaking, you'll probably get more tokens that way from actually defeating other players and so on and so forth. But even if it looks like it's an atrocious item to end up getting, think of it this way. This is easier to get than Gonda and better than Gonda. The reason why I say this is because it's something that you can specifically grind for rather than relying on randomness of Trove of Wonders. And as you've seen in my videos, you know just how deep that pot can go before you end up actually getting a Gonda. But on top of that, what this mount does is if we end up doing our main attack button with it, boop, we get launched into the air, and it's actually a pretty significant amount of height. It's actually the equivalent of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 player jumps. And you can just end up doing this, do a couple jumps to keep yourself in the air, and then do another one. And then you could do another one. Okay, it lagged out and broke because that's just what happens in Trove. Yeah, look at this. What? I didn't even click. That was like from residue when I clicked while I was up in the air. But anyways, my point is that the reason why I and so many others argue that this is going to end up being one of the best mounts for the end game is because a lot of the later Uber worlds are going to end up having very, very vertical dungeons. And so now you can just do this and the world's your oyster. You can just get into them super duper quick. It does cause a little bit of block damage, the initial explosion, but generally speaking, it's not really that much. I can't get off my mount right now. I'm literally using all of my attacks just to get off of it. God, this game is a mess. But anyways, moving on to Season 3, it did end up adding a new dragon. It did add some other mounts. It did add some other helmet auras and stuff. But generally speaking, all you're going to want is this mount out of all of it. They did add a Bomber Royale queue. Private Bomber Royale matches, although you don't get rewards in private matches, so who cares. Bomber Royale rewards have also been increased with new mounts, new banners, blah blah blah, who cares. They also in this update ended up changing how knockback works. Or at least they say they changed how knockback works, but they didn't really. Because let's face it, we're still knocking enemies like left and right. But essentially, they are supposedly adjusted knockback so that it's not supposed to be as bad. And a lot of classes ended up having some more stability. The stability stat is just anti-knockback, basically. They basically added stability to a lot of the other classes so that as they level up, they get a little bit more stability. It doesn't really matter. It's kind of pointless. And again, you still get knockback anyway. Knockback is supposed to be scaled off of health now as well, and so the more health you have, the less you get knocked back. I haven't really noticed any difference whatsoever. In the Bomber update, they ended up introducing some new dungeons, some new styles and stuff, some of them being animal mass and junk like that. And generally speaking, like, it's not like it was a bad update or anything. It's just I don't know anybody who cares about Bomber. Like, it's a sad fact of reality. I just think that it was kind of a waste of resources. And then lastly, we've got the Sunrise update. Now, this is the big one, and in a lot of ways, I still personally would argue that this is probably one of Trove's best updates in years. I'm not clickbaiting or anything like that. Like, legitimately, I really, really enjoy this update. It's given me something to do. Lots of people are just rushing to the end game content. They're, getting to the end game way faster than me, but I'm, I enjoy this game and I enjoy the grind. And I've been basically playing this game for years without having any sort of thing worth grinding. I haven't had anything returning to me, right? And so now that I actually have the opportunity to level up my gems and to actually grind Uber Worlds again, frankly speaking, I'm going to drag it out. I'm going to just enjoy it and take it at my leisure. I don't really care about rushing or getting to the strongest immediately, especially when it's so pay to win. Of course it's pay to win. You thought this was a different game? That doesn't necessarily mean that as a problem, though, because generally speaking, you can approach all of this content as free to play. It's just going to end up inflating the player numbers, sorry, not player numbers, the amount of time that it's going to take to do all this stuff. But anyways, the Sunrise update is stupendous. Basically, they ended up adding crystal gems to the game. And when you have a stellar gem that's at level 25, which is the original maximum level of a gem, you will be able to force... or not force, but convert that stellar gem into a crystal gem with this nifty little crystal gem conversion item, which I've already got other videos individually talking about. Should you end up converting your gems and so on and so forth, whatever, just because the gems tab, idiot, the gems themselves or the gem converters are going to end up being quite expensive, as you can see, at 15,000 cubits each, or 1,500 credits each, which is... Don't do the pay to win, but at the same time, this is extremely time gated right here, because that's going to end up being, I think, what was it I calculated out to? I think to get all of your gems on one class, mind you, so this would be for one physical set or magic set of gems, I think it's the equivalent of 66.6 days of cubits. So that's pretty bad. That's also with patron, so if you don't have patron, get wrecked. But anyways, that's just one set of gems, not even including the magic set of gems. I'm still going to end up trying to work on getting one good set of physical gems, one good set of magic, and then we'll call it a day. But generally speaking, the crystal gems are going to end up being a very, very big part of the update. We've also got a couple other things that happen with this update, namely we got a new class, the Solarion, which I'll go into a little bit more detail. I forgot I looked this stupid. We'll go into a little bit more detail with the class as we end up going through it, but going through the patch notes, but I wanted to have the bulletin points, which is going to end up being the Solarion, a new biome, crystal gems, U11 Uber Worlds, the Atlas being appropriately changed to compensate for that, because we have U11 for all Uber Worlds now, which is absolutely awesome. They've had some store updates, namely there's going to end up being the new boxes. These are going to be the Greater Sundered Cache. I have a video showing these off. I opened 100 of them and they don't give you anything. These are some of the worst cash shop boxes I've seen. You're going to have to spend a lot of money just to get very minimal items, unless you get luckier than me, which isn't hard to do. And then there's going to end up being some additional updates. So first and foremost, let's talk about the Solarion class. Obviously, we've got some other videos that are going to go into more detail, so I'm just going to give you guys the broad strokes. So we're going to end up having this little Phoenix thing as our passive, and the big thing about this class is it does damage over time. So let's call it a dot. That's what we call it for short, is dot means damage over time. Generally speaking, you could think of this class as doing burning damage, or it's actually basically the same as doing poison damage. So it has these different attacks that will end up going on an enemy, and then it has a certain amount of damage over time, or a tick rate, where it's going to end up being certain amount of damage over the course of a few seconds, right? So you can kind of see it on this training dummy. Again, these are not actual representing numbers of how much damage I'm doing because the training dummy is kind of broken. But you can see what our Phoenix guy is doing is he's got these little wing VFX up here. So that's going to end up being his damage over time effect. Obviously, it's going to scale off of all of our abilities, but I'm just saying that there is going to end up being multiple dots tied to this character. So if I right click, and if it actually works, there you can see the little X right there. That's going to end up being a dot. If I hit him with my number 1 ability, now we've got 3 different dots going at the same time. And if I end up doing my base attack, that is going to actually refresh all of the dots that are currently on my target. But wait, there's more. So on top of all of that, the ultimate ability is going to end up having this crazy explosive effect, which is going to end up just dealing even more damage. So essentially what you're going to do is tag an enemy with every single one of your dots, use your ultimate, pop a flash, and whatever you're fighting is going to die. Because the Solarion, with all of its dots going on, from what I've heard from people, this is the strongest class currently in the game. Just in terms of its damage. Now, where this class suffers is its movement speed. It's not very good. Generally speaking, there is going to end up being some weird little tricks, like people keep telling me about this thing where you aim northwest and you wiggle back and forth and it does give you more movement speed. I don't know how, it's just weird. I don't care. I don't want to end up learning some new tech that's going to end up ultimately giving me carpal tunnel. Maybe it's a lot easier to do it on controller because you would just wiggle the joystick, but it looks stupid. It is going to end up giving you a lot of movement speed, which generally speaking can end up being used to make any character that is otherwise slow really, really fast. However, for the Solarion, generally speaking, he's not going to end up being a very fast character. A lot of his attacks are going to end up dealing lots and lots and heaps of damage. The ultimate, as I mentioned, is going to end up, basically using a big blast, and we're also going to end up building up little Phoenix feathers down here, so we actually have a big shotgun blast. Video effects are broken in our club world, unfortunately, but we would be shooting 5 arrows at a time and slowly dissipating that charge. That's going to end up being tied to the damage over time effects, though, and our Phoenix and everything is going to slowly build that up, as well as build up our energy, because you'll notice that the class does not benefit from energy regen. And then once you end up having enough energy, you can use your ult. That's going to expend the energy, which means that you want to use your base attack combined with all your dots so that you can try your best to regen energy out so that you can keep your ult up for a longer period of time. Yay, simple enough. We got through it. So the subclass for the Solarion is actually going to end up being very, very good, if not one of the best, just because of the fact that it is going to end up giving you a bunch of light. So for 140 light extra by having it at max level, and by having its PR increased, you're going to end up having base attacks have a chance to explode, dealing damage to enemies and applying a damage over time effect that restores energy, which can end up being pretty useful for a lot of classes that end up using rapid fire. Now, generally speaking, I still just use the Knight just because I like having that extra flask capacity, but if I want to end up dealing more damage, I would end up using the Solarion one, right? So they end up going into more details of what all the specific damage numbers are at specific power ranks and so on, but again, we've covered that in other videos. So there's also going to end up being the hidden ring effects of the new class, which is going to end up being Guiding Flight, useless, Solar Stance, useless, and Prismatic Chain, the only one that actually causes damage and is going to end up being useful. Because one of the other weird things about this class is when you right click something, you get a slow fall effect, which is not good for dungeons. I don't know why they added it. I think it's just because of the way that the new biomes work, which we'll talk about momentarily. But the Prismatic Chain basically makes it so that enemies will end up having a chance to have your ultimate explode off of them and cause a chain reaction. And so it can just do insane, absolutely insane damage, okay? So there's going to end up being a couple costumes with the class. Generally speaking, there's going to end up being a bunch of cash shop packs that will end up having the class and some costumes. So the cheapest that you can get this guy is like $10, which is considerable. It's like 10 or 15. Either way, it's very, very affordable considering how difficult it is to actually farm this class free to play. It's actually probably one of the hardest classes to get completely free to play. And frankly speaking, even if credit pouches are really, really expensive for you guys on console, because I know that they probably are by now, generally speaking, it's still going to be easier as a free-to-play player to grind the credit pouches to buy one of the packs to get the class than it is to try and craft the class. It's that bad, I'm not joking. Then we've got the Sundered Uplands biome, which starts at U7, but also ends up just automatically being the main biome that you'll see when you go to U8, U9, U10, whatever. I don't know. The devs are just always obsessed with the new biome that they add, right? So this biome comes with a couple qualms. First and foremost, the biome is going to look very, very similar to the Skyland biome. Ignore the arrow that I've got on my screen. It's just a mod that I'm trying out. But there's going to end up being two biomes. So there's a biome up here and a biome down here, which generally speaking, I kind of like the Ashen area a lot more than the Skyland, just because the Skyland seems fairly generic and the same as the other Skylands that we've already seen. We do get a lot of new dungeons, which is very, very nice. And generally speaking, the Ashen biome, though really cool, you don't spend much time down there, unfortunately. However, with these two biomes that we essentially get combined into one, it does mean that the content is split. So a lot of resources you will only get on the higher end, and a lot of resources you'll only get on the lower end, including ore, plants, mob drops. It's pretty bad because you're going to have to use all of that in order to end up crafting a lot of the Sundered Uplands stuff. So this is related to the Solarion, which we've already got other videos tackling this and just how ridiculously expensive all of this is. But yeah, and then on top of all of that, there's going to also end up being a quick falling effect that you can see in the top left. So if you come to this biome and you're like, why am I falling so quickly with my wings? That's because for some weird reason, they just added it into the game as a way to just hurt the player, right? It just basically makes it a lot worse to farm this area, which another reason why Volatile Bounder is going to end up being your best friend. But the new wings that you can end up crafting in the table or getting out of one of the Solarion packs will actually negate the quick falling. So you'll notice that it's actually really glitchy. We fall really fast and then it stops almost immediately. And that's going to end up being related to all of the Sundered Upland wings, which I have another video showing those off as well. Generally speaking, though, this area is going to end up being the hardest area in the game. The enemies are extremely scaled. They do make this world available as early as U1 Adventure Worlds. I don't know why, but okay, whatever. And generally speaking, like I said, there's going to end up being a lot of new resources in here. And how do you end up getting rid of the annoying fast falling? Well, you can end up getting these weird items from, there's multiple items like this from NPCs that you can get. I don't know anyone who's dumb enough to end up getting any of these. They're just a beginner's trap. Don't do it, because these are extremely expensive and they are also timed. So even at 5,000 cubits, which is ridiculous, you would only end up getting unrestricted flight for 3 days, whether you're online or offline. So frankly speaking, just get the wings and there you go, forget it. The only reason that you have to actually get some of these is because they are actually required in order to craft some of the wings. Yep. So they've also got, what else do we got? So there's a couple other NPCs that'll end up giving you jumps, extra damage buffs and stuff like that, as well as damage reduction. You can only have one of the effects on at a time. But this does make sense as to why these enemies are so overscaled. So another big thing that I gotta let you guys know about, obviously, is going to end up being U11 Uber Worlds and U10 and so on and so forth. But we'll get into that very, very quickly momentarily here, because I don't think there's much else to say about the Sundered Uplands biome. There's obviously a lot to cover. But generally speaking, like I said, I've already talked about that in the other video, so we don't need to get into it today. So now we're on to the Crystal Gems segment of the patch notes, which, as I mentioned before, when you get a Stellar Gem to level 25, you can convert it over. However, I didn't necessarily talk about how you can organically get Crystal Gems, and of course, they are going to be exclusive to U11. So, you know, when you end up going into your Prime Uber Worlds or just Elemental Worlds or whatever, and you end up getting those boxes that can drop up to Stellar, well, now Crystal Gems can end up dropping from U11 boxes, which means that you get Stellar Gems commonly, which means that that you're getting lots and lots of gem dust, which is great because you're going to need gem dust in the hundreds of thousands of millions of gem dust in order to end up leveling up all your gems. I'm not joking, it's that bad. But there is a couple little tricks that you can end up doing, which is going to end up kind of negating it. I don't know, it's still a very slow process, but again, I'm perfectly fine with dragging that content out and just enjoying it at my leisure. So the main thing is going to end up being gem sparks. So when you're leveling up a gem, like let's take this gem for example. Whoops, no, my gems are on my Shadow Hunter, sorry. This gem, for example, here. So this is a level 29 gem. I can't level it up. It's a cosmic gem. I need to have 15 gem sparks of the cosmic gem element, and then I also need to have a prism, right? So if we go to adventure crafting table, you'll notice all of these new things in the gem table. So how do I end up getting the gem sparks? Well, I can craft them for 30,000 gem dust of that elemental type a pop, or I can loot collect a crystal gem. Now, the fun fact is we ended up doing some testing on a live stream that one of you guys ended up graciously telling me about this trick that I didn't know. I don't remember who told me about it, so sorry I can't do proper shout outs. But essentially, there is a trick that you could have already done with your gems right now, where if you level them up to 15 and then you loot collect them, generally speaking, you will end up getting more gem dust back than you ended up spending to level it up. The same is true to the gem sparks, because crystal gems will actually loot collect into a single gem spark. And if you level that gem up to level 15, you'll end up getting 2 gem sparks. Now, further than that, it is risky and you have to have a lot of gem dust to compensate, but you can actually get, this is without any boosters by the way, you can actually level up a crystal gem to level 25 and then you can end up loot collecting it, and generally speaking, you'll end up getting your gem dust back. It's difficult to do just because of how random it can be. Or was it level 25 or level 20? I'd have to double check that. Don't try that at home. But it was one of those numbers where you would end up basically getting it up to the next level of threshold, which I think was level 25. And then you essentially end up getting even more gem sparks. And so it was more worthwhile in the end because you ended up getting more gem sparks, because the gem sparks can of course be brought back in to the gem dust itself as a 1-for-1 ratio, right? So not bad. But anyways, let's talk about the prism, which is going to end up being the gem shard. I just call it a prism because it makes more sense, because it's going to actually take gem sparks of every element, 4 of them, which is ridiculous, to craft 1. Yeah, it's pretty bad. Generally speaking, though, this is a lot easier than it was when it was on the test server, so I guess I can't complain, and even leveling up the gems is a lot cheaper too. Oh, wait, you can craft this. No, you can't. Look at this. This is just to convert 1 gem. Don't bother with it. There is going to end up being crystal and power gem boxes as well, which you can see is not bad. They're very, very expensive if you go for specific elements, obviously. But most of all, it's just got to do with the gem dust dedication to it, which we'll get into why that's annoying in a bit. There's going to end up also being the Phoenix Mote, which is found rarely in Sundered Uplands from bosses, invaders, and dungeons. And I mean very rarely. Generally speaking, though, it's not like I've been spending that much time in the Sundered Uplands outside of doing the new 5-star dungeons, because the new biome doesn't really have any incentive. And unfortunately, Prime Worlds have a chance of dropping gem boxes, whereas the elemental worlds are guaranteed. And so the most efficient way to farm for the new gems is to quite literally go out of your way to each of the different elemental worlds so that you can get enough gem dust and gem sparks so that you can then end up combining them all into a gem prism and leveling up your gems, right? Because the prime world is just so inefficient, there is no reason to farm it, unfortunately. Now, another topic that I didn't end up talking about too much was the 5-star dungeons, because generally speaking, that's going to end up covering crystal gems as a whole. And the 5-star dungeons, there's going to end up being some new ones related to U10 and U11 of Prime Uber Worlds. Now, there's no reason to end up tackling the U11 5-star dungeons in the Prime Uber Worlds, okay? Literally no reason, because the resources that you end up getting out of these dungeons is going to end up being the exact same as you would get out of U11. However, Crystal 4 drops can end up coming out of these new 5-star dungeons, which they can also end up dropping out of Geode's surface 5-star dungeons, so long as you're in U11. And so there's literally no point to go to U11 of the Sundered Uplands 5-star dungeons. No, there just isn't any reason to. Because I got another video talking about the 5 stars that explains it in a much more elegant and shorter way than I could possibly end up doing today. But to skim over it, you're going to end up getting to wave 71 on these 5 stars, because yes, technically they have infinite waves, but the last reward that you can get for your total weekly amount of reward, because it's time gated what you can earn from these dungeons, because the Trove devs don't like fun. You only go up to wave 71, wait out the timer so that the dungeon counts as complete, then you end up claiming your rewards, and then you don't have to touch that 5-star dungeon for a week. Kind of disappointing. But again, if you want to end up going for Crystal 4 gear, it's much easier to just do 5-star dungeons in Geode's surface. And why is that? Well, because the Sundered Uplands will only drop Crystal 4 gear from a chest that requires a key, and it's a singular chest, mind you. However, in the U11 Geode topside, every chest that you open from a 5-star dungeon has a chance of dropping Crystal 4, and none of them require chests, go figure. Anyways, that's going to end up being U11 as a nutshell. It, generally speaking, is going to end up being a lot stronger. Obviously has a 30,000 PR requirement. Generally is going to require 35k PR in order to even handle the area. And you're going to have somewhere around, like, let's say 8.5, maybe 9k light in order to efficiently handle U11. Which is really, really crazy, I know, but you gotta consider that the cosmic gems give a lot more light now that we can end up getting them to a higher tier. You can see I'm sitting here at 10k light. Obviously, I got a permatorch and stuff, though. Speaking of a permatorch, you guys on console got one for free, didn't you? Well, a lot of you did. Most of you probably didn't. But if you didn't know, there's this Leviathan badge, and they handily now give you a U10 permatorch, which is a permanent torch, which is one of the rarest items in the entire game. You just get one for free by killing 250 Leviathans, which is a very, very big deal. There's a couple other small quality of life things that we ended up talking about in other videos. But anyways, let's get into the next category, which is going to end up being subclass power rank updates. So this kind of sucks because it's misleading. Most of all because I think that the devs made a mistake. I think that they just didn't end up doing these properly. So essentially, now that we can have such high amounts of power rank can actually go up to somewhere around 46k something is the new maximum, right? And with it means that we have to have subclasses increase in strength, because what happens with subclass abilities is this effect right here is basically going to end up increasing with every 5,000 power rank that the Solarion ends up getting, up to 40k PR. It doesn't go to 45k. Go figure. But the funny thing is that a lot of these subclass abilities don't actually scale up to 40k like it says that they do. Yeah, generally speaking, a lot of these subclass abilities are just going to end up being increased damage and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, some of these abilities are very misleading. So they mention, you know, even on the Knight subclass ability, for example, that now 40k PR, oh, you get more movement speed on amount. No, you don't. You only need to get your Knight to 30k PR, and then you're at maximum movement speed for the class. If 30k PR or 25k PR, it's actually something considerably low, and then you no longer will see the benefit of having the higher power rank for the movement abilities, which kind of sucks. On top of that, it makes me question the damage output of some of these subclass abilities and whether they've changed as well, because there's not really any way to tell other than just using them and being like, this is considerably weak versus what the patch notes are saying, right? But I didn't test any of that stuff. Generally speaking, I have been messing with some subclass abilities and very pleasantly surprised with a lot of them. You know, generally speaking, just the increased amount of damage is going to be very, very nice. So then they end up talking about some new store changes, which is just talking about the Solarion pack, crystal gem converters and crap that we ended up talking about. And then there's also going to end up being a fairly hefty additional changes section, which we are not going to talk about today because otherwise we'll be here for a considerably longer time. Generally speaking, I think we did a pretty good job getting through 3 different patches in under an hour. Now, I know that I kind of skimmed over a lot of it, but as I mentioned previously, I've already got dedicated patch notes videos that, of course, is about the PC patch notes, but I mean, let's face it, you guys on console are getting the exact same thing, so those videos are still relevant. I will put a link in the description to each of those patch notes, but I will also put a link in the description to each of these forum posts so that you guys could read through them if you want to as well. But rest assured, it is a lot of text, and although there is some nice quality of life changes, I did end up covering the brunt of these updates. And again, I'm very, very happy that you guys got it on absolutely everything related to Trove. I think that that's awesome, and I hope that you ended up enjoying today's video. I gotta take a breath and I gotta have some water. Smash like, sub for more, buy the merch you want to support the channel, and have a wonderful day, everybody.